Okay. Okay, so today's talk is about the Hebron Massacre, which, according to one historian by the name of Hillel Cohen, who wrote a couple of books, both in Hebrew and English, on the massacre, he calls it the year zero of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Again, it's maybe a stretch, but it's not. I don't think it's. I would definitely say that 1929 redefined the conflict. And what it did is, we will see, 1929, what it did is it added it changed the conflict from being mainly a political conflict to a religious one. Okay, that's number one. Number two, 1929, the Chevron Jewish settlement came to an end. Throughout history, there's been at least some Jews living in Hebron, sometimes less, sometimes more. And then by 1929, that community was completely evacuated. And after 1967, yes, we have some presence there, and the supervision of the soldiers. But it's not the same. If 1929 would not have happened, we have no idea if Hebron would have been completely in our control right now. Even though at the time, as we will see at the time, Hebron only had about maybe 700 Jews to about 17,000 Arab Muslim population, right? So the Jews were definitely a small minority, but they were starting to grow, as we'll see shortly. Okay, so again, the title, when Kishinev came to Hebron, I got from the book that Alex lent me. But wasn't him. Daniel Gordis was not the guy who made this up. There were others who made this comparison, because a lot of the Jews that were in Israel in 1929, right, in Hebron as well, were Jews that came from Russia, from Ukraine, who all experienced last year. If you remember, we spoke about the pogroms in Proskurov, right, also known as Khmelnytsky today. So a famous Hebrew poet, Avram Shlonsky, he also writes, Leproskurov domsa Kiryat Damta Kiryat HaMachpelah, right? The city of Machpelah, which is another word for Hebron, right? Because that's where the Meorat HaMachpelah is located. So it became similar to Proskurov. So the associations, the comparisons to a Russian-style pogrom were pretty much made by everybody. So 1929, that's where we are. Again, for Americans, 1929 is the year of the big stock market crash, right? That's if you collect that. But anyways, let's just give first a little bit of a background to Hebron itself and the Jewish community there, then talk about the general yeshuv and things that were going on at the time to set the background, and then we'll move on to the happenings at the time. So, as I said, Hebron belonged to the four kind of holy cities of Eretz Yisrael that we were intimately connected with, right? And they are Yerushalayim, Tzfas, Hebron, and Tveria, right? These are all the cities that we have that are kind of well known for their biblical significance. And after, so even though Hebron throughout all of its history had some sort of a Jewish population, it definitely picked up after 1492, after the Spanish expulsion, when the Sephardic Jews started trickling into it, right? That's when it happened. And that's when shortly afterwards, they found the Beit HaKnesset Shel Avram Avinu, right? The Avram Avinu Shul, and again, I will show you a picture of somewhere. Okay. So, anyways, but so as the community is building, so you have during Montefiore, Montefiore invested a lot of his time and effort to building up the Eretz Yisrael. So they sponsored a census in 1838. They calculated about 700 Jews living in Hebron in 1838, and the community was growing. So the next census, they were about 1,100 Jews in Hebron in 1906 to 14,000 Muslims. However, by 1929, the community actually went down a bit, and there were, like I said, there were maybe 750, maybe 800 Jews in Hebron at the time. But there were things that were developing. They had a clinic called the Beit Hadassah Clinic, which we'll come back to in a second. There was even a bank, something called the Anglo-Palestine Bank. That was also the development, showing that the community was developing and being modernized. However, so this was, when did this massacre occur? This massacre occurred on August 24th, 1929. So literally, it was 2 weeks. That time was 2 weeks after Tisha B'av, and for us, it's basically similar. But since it was like deep summer, right? So the yeshiva, which we'll mention in a second, the Chevron yeshiva, which is known today, right? There's one of the biggest yeshivas in the world, is the Chevron yeshiva, right? What is the Chevron yeshiva? The Chevron yeshiva is really the Slabodka yeshiva. So why is it called the Chevron yeshiva? Because at that time it was in Chevron, and as a result of these tragedies, it had to run away. Basically, it was evacuated from Hebron and it's relocated to Yerushalayim. It never went back to Hebron. But this, so right, even my connection to it is Rabbi Yitzchak Hutner. Rabbi Yitzchak Hutner, the Yeshiva Zatzal of Chaim Berlin, was at the yeshiva at the time. He was studying in the yeshiva at the time, and he was actually away for this Shabbos, because again, this was Bein Hazmanim. This is the vacation. This is Bein Hazmanim. One second. Hold on a second. How do I do this? I can't move. Okay, then let me just get everybody. Okay. Okay, so so this was during Bein Hazmanim. So a lot of the yeshiva bochurim were actually away, and so at the time they estimate that there were about 550 Jews in Chevron at the time of the massacre, and about 200 people were actually away that Shabbos. Okay, some of the notables of Chevron is names that you're probably familiar with, right? The Chidor, Chaim Yosef David Azulai, he spent some time in Chevron. He was the Shadar. He was sent away to the different communities of Europe to collect money for the community of Eretz Yisrael. So he was connected to Chevron. And even Rav Gershon Kitover. Who's Rav Gershon Kitover? Anybody is familiar with Hasidic history? Rav Gershon Kitover is the brother-in-law of the Baal Shem Tov. The brother-in-law of the Baal Shem Tov, the one who initially kind of rejected him and didn't write, if you know the whole story of how Baal Shem Tov appeared, and with a letter from the father that's supposed to be that his sister was supposed to marry him, and he was like, "Who are you?" And tried to kick him out, and eventually got married against his will. But then he kind of became an ardent follower of the Baal Shem Tov. And when the Baal Shem Tov sent many of his talmidim to Eretz Yisrael, this Rabbi Gershon Kitover was one of the people that went to Eretz Yisrael. And for the first 6 years of his time in Eretz Yisrael, he was in Chevron, right? So from 1747 to 1753. And then the 1900, there's you have the picture, is you have who's known as the Sdei Chemed. Sdei Chemed is like an amazing work. I mean, Sdei Chemed is it's the, what's the word? It's the Google before the Google, right? In other words, he's like the Jewish encyclopedia, where he just rattles off connections and sources, and it's just before there was like any lookup books, he was like the original Sdei Chemed that just brings everybody who exists. And his name is Rav Chaim Chizkiya Medini. Okay, and they also have on the same picture, you have a photograph from 1925 from this Avram Avinu synagogue is here also. Okay, so that's as far as the Chevron community goes. What about what's going on in the Yishuv of Eretz Yisrael? So right away, you probably know that in 1917, it was the famous Balfour Declaration, right? But that was the Balfour Declaration happened in 1917. That's before the end of World War I, and it's even before the British had any control over Palestine. It was still under Ottoman control. But nonetheless, the Balfour Declaration was made. In 1920, once already the World War I is over and the British did have control of Palestine, then you have the San Remo Conference, which basically confirmed the British mandate for Palestine and basically confirmed the Balfour Declaration. Here you have a clip from a newspaper, right? Zionist rejoicings, British mandate for Palestine welcome, right? News, etc., of the conferment of the mandate. for Palestine and Great Britain was created a great impression on Zionist and Jewish circles.
What date was that printed?
I'm not sure. It was soon after. So this was like April. It was like April 24th. Was I'm not even sure if it says this here. In some other sources I saw that it says that April 24th. Oh, here it says here the event will be celebrated in all Jewish centers with great joys, and the date April 24th, 1920 will perhaps become a Jewish national holiday. Okay, so far we do not celebrate April 24th as a Jewish national holiday. But anyways, so as this is happening, right, as the politics of Eretz Yisrael seem to be lining up in favor of the Jews, right, then the pogroms of Ukraine are happening that we spoke about last year. And so a lot of the Russian and Ukrainian Jews are starting to run away, and they're coming to Eretz Yisrael, and this is known as the third Aliyah, and it's estimated that about 35,000 Jews came between 1919 and 1923 during those gruesome pogroms. As we said last year, that those pogroms, between 100,000 to 200,000 Jews were killed in those pogroms. Okay, in 1929, okay, as a result, connected to the San Remo conference and other things that were going on, you have again, there were riots really ongoing, but these are the Jaffa riots, and as a result of those Jaffa riots, and that they see that the new British mandate for Palestine is not really capable of protecting Jews from the Arabs. So that's when the Haganah was created in 1921. And then later in 1922, we have something called the Churchill White Paper, which is the cover of it, as you can see on the paper. The Churchill White Paper, which was not good for the Jews, because initially, during the Balfour Declaration, the Jews thought that they were going to get both sides of the Jordan, right? The Israel side and the what today is Jordan side. And the Churchill White Paper basically said that's a non-starter. So the Jews are not getting the east bank of the Jordan River. Okay, and then finally, so 1925, we're going to come back to it again. There was a ruling as a result of some other clashes related to the wall, to the Wailing Wall, to the Western Wall. Is that forbade any furniture when praying by the temple, by the plaza in front of the kotel. Now you could see over here, this is the picture of the kotel. The kotel itself was always, again, before even anything about the Yishuv, the kotel was always a Jewish religious symbol, even though technically it belonged to that whole area, whatever, Haram al-Sharif, right? That whole area of the Muslim court was all Muslim. The area where the plaza is, what we call the Kotel Plaza, is known as the Mughrebi Waqf. In other words, it was really part of the Moroccan Arabs. Okay, and around that area there were some Moroccan Arabic Muslim Moroccan Muslim houses. They were not really religious houses; they were actually private houses that people had around that plaza area, but they were still connected to this whole area called Haram al-Sharif, okay? And so, but Jews always came to that plaza and they always prayed, and that was just a tradition that was going on for centuries. However, now that things were heating up on a nationalistic way, okay, now the religious element became also a touchy issue. And again, this is where everything is going to come out from the kotel, right? The entire massacre, which was part of really of a bigger something called the Palestine riots of 1929. It's all going to be related to the Kotel Hamaravi. That's what it's all about. So let me just continue. I'm going to come back to the Kotel again. So I want to talk about, again, the Slabodka yeshiva. The Slabodka yeshiva, as you know, is one of these magnificent Jewish institutions, legendary Jewish institutions, because it represented like the Musar movement as a whole, right? That's number one. So the altar of Slabodka was the one who was the founder of the yeshiva and was associated with it. He's pictured over here. He had many Talmidim, and today like, I don't know how many of the yeshivas, but a number of the yeshivas are all associated with the Slabodka yeshiva. The Slabodka yeshiva, there were basically like three, you could say, three major kind of yeshiva systems, even not even single yeshiva system. There was the Knesset Yisrael, which was the Slabodka yeshiva. Then it had a break-off which called itself Knesset Yitzchak, okay, and they named themselves after Yitzchak Elchanan, the Yitzchak Elchanan inspector. And technically, those two yeshivas were broke off because they had some conflict and disagreement. But over time, they were actually pretty much functioned together, and they helped each other out, especially during World War I. But Knesset Yisrael was the Slabodka yeshiva, and then there was also the Navardik yeshiva system, and very, very different, right? If you know the Navardik yeshiva system, it's all about break yourself, put yourself down, be humble, right? The Slabodka yeshiva system was all about you have to dress respectfully, you have to realize there's something called gadlus ha'odam. A person is great, and the person has to be full of dignity. And they dressed modern. They dressed like Western. They had a certain personality and certain flair. Chaim Berlin is because, like I said, Rabbi Yitzchak Hutner was a Talmud of the Slabodka yeshiva. The Chofetz Chaim yeshiva that we have today, the Chofetz Chaim yeshiva system, right, founded by the Leibowitz's family, were also part of the Slabodka influence. Okay, so each of these yeshivas took the idea of gadlus ha'odam and changed it, incorporated it in different ways. So what happened was that in 1924, the Alter of Slabodka, who himself wanted to go to Eretz Yisrael for a long time, decided that because of the Lithuanian authorities were starting to draft yeshiva boys, that it's better for them to relocate to Eretz Yisrael. And like I said, things in Eretz Yisrael were seemed to be improving. So he sent first Rabbi Moshe Mordechai Epstein, Rabbi Cheskel Sarna, and Rabbi Avraham Grodzinski. The three of those he sent to find a place for the Slabodka yeshiva in Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Moshe Mordechai Epstein actually then went to America to raise money for the yeshiva because this is going to be an expensive move. So he went to America to raise money for the yeshiva, and there were already some Slabodka alumni who immigrated in America and actually made it big, who already had money, and so they went to those people to get money for the move. Meanwhile, Rabbi Cheskel Sarna, who I have a personal connection with because we studied here at Mesilas Yesharim, and he has a very beautiful notes on Mesilas Yesharim, and Rav Avram Grodzinski were given the kind of the practical task of finding the place, settling it, etc. And again, the first move, the first idea was Yerushalayim. Where else would we go? But Yerushalayim, there were other yeshivas already present that were not too excited about Slabodka moving in, and also because of their Western and modern dress, and Yerushalayim was still a very old yeshuvi type of a place. They felt that they would be out of place at Yerushalayim. They would cause they felt they would be out of place, and so that's why they decided to pick on Hebron, because in Hebron there was a quiet place, unknown place, and they would not be an eyesore to the people. However, they were an eyesore to the Arabs in the town because the Arabs were not too crazy about these Western looking European guys coming in. And again, as we shall see, out of the 67 people that were brutally murdered in Hebron, 55 of them were Ashkenazi. Okay, and that's not by coincidence, that's by intent. Okay, so what else is unusual and very new is that for the first time, this is the first time, right now we think of it as commonplace, of people going to Eretz Yisrael to study in yeshiva for a year or two, but this is for the first time you have American bochurim, real American bochurim traveling to Eretz Yisrael to study full time. Okay, and there were I don't remember exactly how many there were total, but at some point basically 15% of the Slabodka yeshiva was made up of the American bochurim. And how did that happen? Because since Rav Moshe Mordechai Epstein came to America to fundraise, and at the same time he also visited the local yeshivas here. There was the REITs was already in place. There was a New Haven yeshiva by Rabbi Levenstein. There were some yeshivas here already in place, and he gave speeches and he impressed certain individuals, and they decided that they were going to move to Hebron to learn there full time. Okay, which is why 8, so altogether 24 in the Hebron yeshiva, 24 out of the 67 people, 24 bochurim will be killed in the Hebron massacre. 8 out of those 24 were Americans, because again, they was bein hazmanim and they really had nowhere to go. So they were there, and 8 of them will be killed again. So this massacre, technically, which in faraway Chevron, which maybe wouldn't have affected, this personally touched the American community. And besides that, they sent letters to the president, Herbert Hoover, at the time, that, after the massacre, that he should have more involvement and more protection for the American community in Israel. And he basically responded with like, "Oh, thank you for your letter. It was nice hearing from you. Goodbye." Okay, and that was it. But here's some. So there's Dovi Safir, I don't know how to pronounce his name, writes for the Mishpacha magazine. He always writes the history articles for the Mishpacha magazine. So in 2020, he wrote a very detailed article here, which I don't have all of it here, but he gathered a lot of these individuals. They wrote letters back home about their time in Hebron, and he put them all together, and he wrote this amazing article. So here you have, so again, it's probably, I don't know if people on the screen can see it, but here I'm just have just a few, really just a few excerpts from some of these letters. So here's a letter from Aaron David Epstein. Aaron David Epstein was, as you can tell by the last name, was related to Moshe Mordechai Epstein, which is how he wound up in the yeshiva. So he writes, "I'm already here in Hebron for a while, and all this time seems like a brief moment. When one learns, the entire world appears good and beautiful. Slowly, the fear of Hashem is entering my heart. It is so good to wake up every morning and know that it will be an interesting day, because it will bring a person closer to Hashem." In another letter, he writes, "The new summer's month began, and I enjoy every day more and more. I feel that even the walls of the yeshiva store spiritual treasures. Many times I think how lucky I am for meriting to be in this holy place. Several times I dreamed that I returned home to America, and I cried that I wasn't able to stay longer in Hebron. And when I awoke, I was very happy to realize that the yeshiva had a tremendous impact on me." And then he concludes his letter, "Your son, who is awakening from the dream state he was in all the days of his life." Okay, here's another letter from Yaakov Wexler. Yaakov Wexler was one of the 2 bochurim from Chicago that were killed. Again, the Yaakov Wexler comes from a very wealthy family, and he basically convinced his father to let him go, who wasn't. They traveled, actually. What happened was they traveled to Israel, because the father was donating some money to Israel, and they traveled to Israel. And when they were there, this Yaakov, who was only 16 years old, convinced his father to let him stay. Okay, and so the aunt was always writing him a letter, "How are you doing?" So when so in one of the letters, he writes to her question, how are things going? He says, "Your question depends on how you define life. If a life of pleasure and luxury is what constitutes life, then I'm missing out on this here. However, according to my definition of life, my life here is happy and content." Right? So we see, what do we see? We see a lot of very dedicated, very eloquent, right, Talmidim. These were not your run-of-the-mill bochurim either. Slabodka was not a place where you could just walk in and say, "Okay, here I am. I'm ready to learn." The people there were like of the highest caliber. These were the geniuses of geniuses. As Yaakov Wexler, I think, paid for a tutor to help him catch him up to date. So that's the again. So yes, that's this. We'll come back to this again. So now again, like I said, things seem to be going well, but now we come to the troubles. And for that, like I said, you have to go back first to 1928, September 1928, Yom Kippur, and this is so what happens? What happens in the Yom Kippur? So remember what I said before, that in 1925, there was an issue like today. I mean, it's like crazy, like 100 years passed and really nothing changed. In 1925, there was a proclamation, that ruling that said that basically that status quo had to be maintained in the Sharam al-Harif, or whatever, Haram al-Sharif, right? That status quo has to be maintained. In other words, Jews were not even allowed to use chairs bring chairs and put chairs into the Kotel Plaza, because they were afraid that anytime you put anything you put into that territory, that means you're kind of starting to take over. That's their concern. And the whole time, so even though we'll see in a second, though, throughout this time, they are constantly, and I say they, I mean the Muslim community, they are constantly changing the status quo. And they are constantly doing this, that, and the other, while the British, who again, they have the mandate for Palestine, they are now responsible with maintaining the status quo. Well, the Jews constantly accuse let's put it this way, the Jews are constantly accusing the British of siding with the Muslims when it comes on the status quo.
Nothing changed.
And yes, exactly, nothing changed. So yeah, we'll see. So what happens? So what happens in by the Koisel? So for the first time when Yom Kippur davening, a certain Hasidic Rebbe decides that it would be better that they put a mechitza for the Yom Kippur davening. Okay. So they put like a little bit 4 boards with some cloth on it, nothing major, and they put the mechitza on that space. Okay. On Friday, and for people who are here, if you go to the next page, you will see some of the key personalities. In this saga. So you have the commissioner. His name is Edward Keithroach. Okay, Edward Keithroach. He's the commissioner. Okay, and a lot of blame is sent his way, because there were as we'll see in this conflict. Although I don't want to spend too much on the political side of it, in the conflict there were many times that all of these tragedies could have been averted. Okay, but so Edward Keithroach, he's the commissioner. He's on Friday. Remember, Friday is a holy day for Muslims. On Friday, he was visiting the Muslim temple on the mount, and he looks down and he sees the mechitza. This is Friday, and the next day is Yom Kippur. He sees the mechitza, and he says, "Whoa, what's going on here? I've never seen this before." And they're like, "Listen, we put up the mechitza for prayers. We'll take it down as soon as Yom Kippur is over." So initially, he seemed to say, "Okay, fine, no problem. Okay, no problem." But later, he issued a directive that the mechitza should be taken down. Supposedly, again, so I have here a memorandum from Colonel Leopold Amory, Secretary of State for the Colonies, dated November 1928, when all of these kind of discussions came to be about his description of the events. Okay, and he claims that he told them to take it down, and they told him they will take it down by morning. But in the morning, when he came there, again, it's Yom Kippur morning, and in Yom Kippur morning, he sees the mechitza again. He tells them, take the thing down, and they tell him, okay, they'll take it down soon. When he came a few hours later and they didn't take it down, this is when they called in for the police, and they started taking the mechitza down violently, despite the Jews begging them they just wait till sunset to take the mechitza off, right? Again, at any time, they could have said, if either this Edward Keithroach or the police commissioner that was involved, if at any time they would have said, you know what, guys, let's just wait till nightfall and take off the mechitza, that's it. Nothing would have happened. They would have just complained for an hour, and they would have seen the mechitza is off, and that would have been the end of the whole story. But that's not what happened. The police came in the middle of Yom Kippur davening and started taking it down. When some Jews tried to intervene from them taking it down, then it got violent and got brutal, and they destroyed the mechitza. And as a result, you see this. Let me see if I could come back to. Hold on. There, I think I put them over there. Back. Okay. So so you see, if you see the on the previous page, you will see the Der Hayom, the newspaper says Sharuris Akoisel Amaravi, right? Chilul Yom Kippurim b'Yerushalayim al Yidei Mishtara, right? There were Mechal Yom Kippur in Yerushalayim, right, etc. And it describes, this was the front page of this of this. So for Jews, this was like a slap in the face. This was, and so as a result of this, there were numerous protestations by Jews that, how come you're infringing on our ability to daven at this holiest of our places? Okay, at this holiest of our places. But nonetheless, the Muslims felt like they won a great victory over here, and so again, going back to our, main personnel of this, right? You might be familiar with this guy, the Mufti of Yerushalayim, Muhammad Amin al-Husseini, right? This was very early in his career. So there's a lot of debate, historical debate, to what degree the Mufti had in this whole riots and the whole massacres, right?
Sheikh Taleb?
No, Sheikh Taleb, I couldn't find a picture of Sheikh Taleb Marka. He was the main instigator of the actual mob in Hebron itself, right? So, and he actually went to jail for it. As you can see over here, this is from October 24th of that year. It says the Sheikh Taleb Marka was sentenced today to 2 years imprisonment and fined £50 on the charge of having instigated Arab attacks upon Jews at Hebron. Okay, so right, all of 2 years exactly. So yeah, but really everybody, all the Jews were convinced at the time that the real person responsible was the Mufti, right? The Mufti, he said that they brought buses and that they gave out cigarettes to anybody who would be involved, and they encouraged them. Not to mention that they also published a bunch of pamphlets that also claimed. Again, we'll come back to the pamphlets in a second. So, after this episode on the Temple Mount, okay, where this is when they used that episode as a way to instigate that the Jews are trying to really take over, but during this whole time, the Muslims began a lot of construction projects on the Temple Mount itself, and specifically right around the Temple Plaza area, so they could block off the entrances, so they could they put their loudspeakers on the side of the Temple Plaza, all in order to make the davening for Jews inconvenient. Again, what about the status quo? Like I said, the status quo was only against the Jews, but not against the Muslims, right? And again, this is from another letter from Benny Horowitz, who was also one of the American boys who wrote the letter. This letter he wrote, I believe, on August 7th of that year. And by the time it got to America, unfortunately, he was already killed. But in one of the, it's a long letter, but one of the things he writes says the main problem which disturbs the Jewish and Arab minds and which causes the arguments between them is the question of the Western Wall. On Yom Kippur of this year, so this is, he's writing already the summer of 1929, but he's going back to to the Yom Kippur before. On Yom Kippur of this year, it all started. The English could not wait 3 hours until the sun to set, and they had to desecrate our holy place on this holy day. Okay, so that's what he writes in that letter. So now fast forward to Tisha B'Av 1929. So Tisha B'Av 1929, as a regular Tisha B'Av, many Jews gathered around the Kotel. Again, the picture that I have here is not from Tisha B'Av 1929, but it's very close around that time. So as you could see, I mean, when I say the Kotel Plaza, you might think of the Kotel Plaza, what it is today. But by the looks of it, this is not much bigger than the Young Israel of Avenue, right? So here again, one of these history things that sometimes calendar sort of brings together two things which make things worse. right? So that year, Tisha B'Av was on a Thursday. So Thursday, August 15th. Okay, and that next day, Friday, which in general is a holy day for Arabs, right? For Muslims, I should say. And on that day was not only there was not a regular Friday, it was also the birthday of Muhammad. Okay, so very seriously religious day for them, and Tisha B'Av, a very seriously religious day for us. Anyways, so on Friday, again, this is also in one of the letters here. Let me see if I can find it quickly. But one of these American bochurim from the Hebron yeshiva also went to the Koisel, and he describes how incredible of an experience that was. But he also says that he claims there were 2,000. It's not clear about the numbers, but some of the what's called the chalutzim. The chalutzim are the pioneers, the pioneers of the yeshiva of Eretz Yisrael, called the chalutzim, and they were at that time already. Again, there was already the Haganah, right? There was also the Beitar youth group, which was also the youth of the Zionists, who were all different levels of, let's call them radical or not radical, but different levels of what you call. So they organized. So the whole week before Tisha B'Av, there were protests in Yerushalayim. Altogether, they say maybe 6,000 people participated in protests in Yerushalayim. 6,000 Jews. That's very significant. And one of the things they were protesting was against whatever was going on in the Koisel. That there was this constant conflict about the Koisel. That on one hand, the Jews are being pushed back, and hey, status quo, don't touch. But the Muslims are changing, are doing all those things to spite the Jews. So there were these major protests going on. Okay, and then on Tisha B'Av, a part of that protest came to the Koisel Plaza. Again, this Benny Horowitz estimates that maybe there were 2,000 young, very energized Zionists, and they were singing Hatikva, and they were also screaming Hakotel Shalom, right? The Kosel is ours. Okay, this was not taken very lightly by the Muslims, and again, with the Mufti's involvement and the leaders, they started printing pamphlets that accused Jews of all sorts of crimes, of either attacking the Al-Aqsa Mosque or even destroying it. They had some doctored images. Again, fake news is not a 2024 concept. They had terrible things. They killed some Arabs. There were lots of things. Not that I'm saying that the Jews were peaceful all the time. There were times when Jews killed Arabs, and there were times when obviously in response to Arabs killing Jews. But again, all of these events are like fodder for these instigators, and it's almost like the anatomy is almost the same. And the real culprits, if you study all of these events, either the pogroms in Ukraine or this massacre, the real culprits are the instigators, because as you will see in a second, again, the regular person, really has no idea what's going on, and the instigators put some ideas out, and then there is like broken telephone. It's the rumors spread, and it gets all exaggerated, and the worst crimes you could imagine, and that's when they want to retaliate, and they get angry, and they just go and they do crazy things. Okay, so where are we? Okay, but this was the spark. As I said, as the things were already very tense in Yerushalayim, the spark was these young Zionists coming to the Temple Mount and screaming Hakotel Shalanu, which then initiated all of the propaganda from the leaders of the Muslims. And they started, like I said, they were spreading, giving cigarettes to their youth to go out and do something. And they were bringing in buses. And it wasn't only in Hebron. Hebron was actually, you'll see in a second, we'll see Hebron was worried the least throughout all of this, because they felt they had really good relationships with the Arabs, and they were there for such a long time. And there was an Ashkenazi component in Hebron, which was to Muslims seemed foreign, but the Sephardi community, which was the majority, they felt like they had such close ties with their Muslim neighbors, then there's no way that anything will happen to them. So most of the riots were going to yes, there will be another slide. Hold on. Most of the riots were going to Yerushalayim, And I have here, so there was something called the Menorah Journal, which was a very interesting publication for many years. So I have here, this is a first-person account of somebody by the name of Edward Robin, and he was living in Yerushalayim, and I just want to tell you. So initially, so again, this is Friday. This is Friday, August 23rd. Okay, and there are rumors going on that the Arabs are planning something. Everybody knows that the Arabs are planning something, and they seem to be. They have buses coming in. There was an attack on a young boy in the Bukharian quarter in Yerushalayim. So this is, again, I'm just reading here in the middle. He says, they say there's another murder in the Bukharian quarter. I hurried out onto the street. Suddenly, young fellows grabbing up bars and sticks and rocks, anything that came to hand, rushed out of every street and alley toward the Bukharian quarter. On the balcony of a house, a Jew with the yarmulke pointed to a pile of iron rods used for reinforcing concrete and cried into the streets, "The Arabs are killing Jews. Take one of these bars. Arm yourselves. Protect your wives and children." Right? So again, I'm just showing, so rumors, even amongst the Jews, rumor spreads. Somebody says the Arabs are killing Jews. Everybody grabs the first stick and they start running. Okay? He describes, a few paragraphs later, he writes, both the attack on Mei Sharim and that on the Bukharian quarter had been beaten back before I arrived. The Arabs had been driven into the hills and outlying districts, which we could see from the small amount on which I was stationed. Okay, then he writes, in the meantime, there was a rumor of an attack on Jaffa Road, and some of us went up. By the time I got to Jaffa Road, that attack too had been beaten back, and the police were in the street. News of attacks in different quarters flew from mouth to mouth. Okay, so this was Yerushalayim, but Yerushalayim, because of this resistance, the Arabs in Yerushalayim were not that successful, and which is why the riots kind of spilled over more to other towns. And this is why the buses started going to Hebron, and and now they already thought, this was Friday still, so they felt now that things were heating up. So now we get to Hebron. Which I call it the Black Sabbath. Now, the truth is, initially I thought I was going to put up pictures of the victims and what happened to them. And the truth is, the pictures are so gruesome that I cannot possibly share with them. So even if you say, again, this is going back to October 7th, which we understand, even if you take the most, the most liberal, I don't know, called progressive side, defending the Palestinians today, okay, there is no excuse for the brutality, and there's no excuse for what they did to the women, right? But this exact thing happened in 1929. Exactly the same thing. It wasn't just, you guys are our enemies, we're gonna kill you. It was brutal attack on men, women, and children. Okay, and unfortunately, like I said, so if you want the what's the word?
The modus operandi.
Right. If you want the horror, somebody published this book called Tevach Hebron Tarpat. These are called Meorot Tarpat. Tarpat is the year 1921, and the Hebrew is Tarpat. So if you want to find that book, you could see the most gruesome things there. But also, this was from afterwards. Again, if you see over here, this picture on the lower left hand corner, this is from a cartoonist who published a whole book of cartoons blaming the Muslims, and this is just one of the cartoons blaming the Muslims and the British for their inactivity and activity for the Muslims during these riots. And this book was prohibited by the British authorities. Was forbidden to have this book. So over here he shows just the Muslim leader being instigating all of the crowds, all of the mobs. Okay, so we come to Hebron. This is Friday, August 23rd. So here's the crazy thing. On August 20th, the Haganah sent 12 members to the community for protection, because again, like I said, things were heating up. So the Haganah sent 12 members, and what happened? So the leader of the community, the political leader of the Hebron community, let's say there's one particular, but the most kind of the most influential person in the Hebron community was a gentleman by the name of Eliezer Dan Slonim. I'll show there's a, for those we'll have a slide about him soon. So Eliezer Dan Slonim, it was the head of this Anglo-Palestine bank. He spoke Arabic, he spoke Yiddish, he spoke probably English also. See, he was a very, very modern person, and at the same time, from a religious, very connected family. And he knew this Ashkenazim, the Sephardim, the Arabs, all of them. He was a very young, friendly person, and he was very well connected and very well respected. And multiple Arabs assured him that there is no way any violence will happen in Hebron. There is no way. Okay, the community is everybody is okay. There is no way. They said we will protect you guys. So you have nothing to worry about. So he sent away the 12 Haganah members. He said, we don't need you. Just the opposite. You're going to cause more of a provocation. Not only that, there was the police chief of the Hebron was a guy by the name of Kaferata. Kaferata was this British officer that was stationed, and he was the head of the police in Hebron. And he, after the massacre, he was really considered a hero, even though the Jews really considered him. He himself, the Kaferata he himself probably killed 15 or 20 Arabs after most of the massacre had already occurred, and after he was already personally attacked by the Muslims himself. But until that time, he did not do much. But in any case, immediately after the effect, he was like a hero. So what happened? So we come to Friday, and like I said, there's buses and rumors of Muslims coming in, of planning an attack, and everybody thinks it's going to be okay. So in on Friday at 4 p.m., the yeshiva is completely empty, and the Muslims start throwing rocks at the yeshiva, and they break some of the glass, and there was nobody in the yeshiva. There's only the gabbai, and this one student. But you see his picture over here. His name is Shmuel Rosenholz. He was alone in the Beis Medrash, and when he heard the rocks, he decided to make a run for it, and he ran outside. And when he ran outside, the mob got him and they killed him. Okay, when they killed him, so the Kaferata only allowed 6 Jews to take him to bury him, because he did not want to start a whole thing. He didn't want to have a Jewish procession going in the middle of the city. So he allowed a very quiet burial for this still on Friday. Okay, but he said, don't worry, from now on everything is going to be calm, everything is going to be okay. But still the Jews were worried. So a lot of the Jews, maybe about 50 to 70 Jews, gathered actually in the house of this Eliezer Dan Slonim, because he thought his house would be the safest. And as we'll see in a second, most of the deaths actually occurred in the house of this Eliezer Dan Slonim. Okay, the other Jews also gathered. Some of them gathered together in different houses in order to be, to be connected. And a lot of them slept on the floor, so that in case there's any rocks thrown through the windows or even any shootings, they're going to be they're going to be on the floor. Okay, early in the morning, so they said Kabbalah Shabbos in each of these places. Again, very nervous, but hoping that everything is going to turn out okay. And then all of a sudden, 8 in the morning, it was just a mob scene where thousands of Muslims descended upon the Jewish area, and then just went house to house by the hundreds, breaking in. The truth is, there were some Muslims that saved a lot of people. There were Muslims that there was an older man who stood in the front of the door, and he, and the youths, threatened him, and I think they even shot him in the foot. And he said, "I'm not moving. These people are under my protection," and they left. So there are definitely numerous instances where Muslims protected the Jews, but there were also numerous instances where there was the coworker or the neighbor or the people that they have known for many years that turned around and brutally killed them. Right. So one such example is the baker. So this is the testimony of Mrs. Immerman, the baker's wife. You see the picture of the baker. He's there in the middle with the beard with his co-workers, and this is the wife and her kids. She has a bandage over her head. So she writes, my husband, Mr. Unger, and his wife stood by the door and held off the pillagers, but they finally succeeded and burst in. I only saw how they killed Unger and his wife with large clubs, and my eyes were injured. I found my husband, then she writes later, after she was beaten up also, but then she came out, she writes, I found my husband wallowing in his blood by a kerosene burner, okay, half burnt. In other words, they took the baker and they burnt him in his own bakery. After I had left the room where my husband was lying, the murderers attacked me and clubbed my head. Okay, but she survived. Okay, so that's just one example. Another gruesome example is the Beit Hadassah clinic, which treated both Muslims and Jews. The Beit Hadassah clinic, which was built by this person, Bentzion Gershon, who was 73 years old at the time, and he had lived there for 52 years. 52 years, he was a limp, he was a cripple, and nonetheless, he was still active as basically the physician of the area. So this is from the Hebron website. They write, on the morning of the riots, the mob tried to break into his house without success. They brought a pregnant Arab woman to his door. Guys, meaning not right away. So they went away. Then they put an Arab woman by the door, and she begged for help. So Benzion's wife Zahava warned that it could be a trick, but Benzion felt obligated to help every person. So he opened the door. When he opened the door, the mob entered the home and attacked Benzion. They cut off his hands and gouged out his eyes. He was stabbed with knives and swords. His daughter Esther tried to protect her parents. I'm not going to read the next line. His wife Zahava also tried to defend her family. She was beaten to death. 3 other children survived in the hiding in another room. They were injured by the rioters. Okay, so like I said, it's not just that it was an attack, but it was an absolute slaughterhouse. It was an absolute slaughterhouse. Okay, and now the house of Eliezer Dan Slonim. Again, so if you see the picture of this Hasidic family, he is the one who is second from left. This young boy kind of resting on his hand. That's Eliezer Dan Slonim, and that's him later in life. The picture of kind of having folded hands. That's him later in life, and so his family. Up on top, there's a picture. The picture of Herzl. That's part of his house. That's part of his house that was completely, again, it's not only about the murder, is that they also went and they looted every house and they broke everything in path. They burnt the Sifrei Torah. They destroyed the Avram Avinu synagogue. It was in the previous slide, if you see that picture. And when it came to Eliezer Donim's house, they actually said, so first of all, he had 2 of his Muslim not co-workers, but colleagues. They said they're going to guard his door for him, and they stayed with him overnight. And in the morning, when the mob came, they said, "Don't worry, we'll just come. We'll go outside, and we'll tell them to leave." And as soon as they went outside, they let the mob in. Okay, and when the mob came in, well, I don't know if this would happen before or after. I'm not sure. They said, "Give us the Ashkenazim. Give us the foreigners." They said, "Instead of Ashkenazim, give us the foreigners, and we'll let you stay." And he says, there are no foreigners here. We're all one. We're all one. And then they broke down his door. And even when they broke down his door, he had a gun in his hand. And he shot into the air. And then they jumped him and they killed him. They killed him. They killed his father-in-law. This is Rabbi Orlansky. That's his picture over here. That's his father-in-law. They were actually supposed to have Sheva brachas for one of their younger sisters was supposed to have Sheva brachas, but for whatever reason, they couldn't find buses because of whatever was going on. So a lot of people didn't make it to the Sheva brachas. And the picture, as you see with Herzl, again, I don't want to be too gruesome, but they broke everything. They left that picture alone. And on top of the picture, they took, I can't say it, but they put something inappropriate on top of that picture. The only person that survived from the Slonim family was this little boy, this 13-month-old boy, who was actually lying under his mother, and they just didn't see him. He was dead. He had a brother who was either 3 or 5 at the time, and they killed him. Okay. Again, there were others. The chief rabbi, also Rabbi Castell, who was the Sephardi chief rabbi, was also brutally murdered. And like I said, 24 of the Slabodka yeshiva, 24 students from the Slabodka yeshiva were killed. Eight of those 24 were the Americans pictured here. Later, Rabbi Sakutner was actually, who was away, he was given the task of writing this Sefer HaZikaron for the Kedoshei Chevron, and where he profiled each of the students, and that's what he did. Okay, so in conclusion, perhaps to some of the things that we've seen in Ukraine, the Hebron Massacre seems familiar, but I think the consequences of it are very significant. Number one, like I said, it ended. So the Jews were not allowed to come back. Basically, they went back just to get their stuff. They brought a few buses just to get their stuff, and whoever survived, and that's it. And the community ceased to exist. And so there was no enclave of Jewish presence until after 1967, where slowly they started to trickle in. And that, I think, again, because from 1929 to 1948, a lot of things happened. Had there been a presence in Hebron, I think that would have changed the Jewish geography of Hebron significantly. That's number one. Number two, what changed is that the violence level just went up, because violence breeds more violence, and so now this brutal type of violence, incites additional type of violence, and so it changed the nature of the conflict. It changed the violence of the conflict. But more importantly, if before the conflict was political, in other words, these guys want a homeland and these guys want a homeland, now the conflict became religious. Okay, it's my religion against your religion, and again, that completely changed the nature of the conflict. Okay, even though it's very late, but I still want to do what I planned on doing is, before davening, I want to read to you. Give this out, please. I want to read to you. This is unrelated. No, not directly related to what we're talking about now. This is a famous shaila. It's a famous shaila that this is the way. And I'm not talking about halachically speaking. I just wanted to read to you the few lines of description of Rabbi Ovadia Yosef regarding the Temple Mount in Yerushalayim HaKodesh. And I think, as we say, the Tefillah of Nachem, I think it will have a greater impact on our mincha. So this is in Chelek Ichavedas Simon Mem Gimel Chelek Aleph. So the shaila is as follows. The shaila is, Hayim lo higia hashor lishnois es hanusach shebetfilas Nachem. Didn't the time come for us to change the nusach of the prayer Nachem, Haneameres b'Tisha B'Av, the one that is said in Tisha B'Av, and especially what we say regarding Yerushalayim, Ha'ir Achareva, a destroyed city, Habizuya, denigrated, V'Havela, and mournful, V'Ashoy Meima, and empty and desolate. She'eina Toyim, as the Mitzius Kayom, it does not reflect today's reality. To our happiness, Yerushalayim is growing very fast. It's being settled in tens of thousands of Jews. And for Koislam Aravi, people gather from thousands of places. And over there we daven and pray in loudly. So how could we say Nachem Hashem, comfort us for the desolate Yerushalayim? It doesn't reflect reality. That's what the question is. Again, there are some people, Rabbi Goren and others, who actually have changed the nusach of Nachem to reflect this reality. But Rabbi Ovadia Yosef was very much against it. So for two reasons. First is that what you probably could think of on your own. It says, I'm only reading the bold text. Who thinks that they can change the tefillah? And change the nusach tefillah sheniskan al yedei rabbeinu kadoshim that was affixed by our holy rabbis. Asher ruach Hashem diber bom, that the spirit of God spoke in them. Umaltelo al shoinam, ubechol teva v'teva bechol ois v'ois, in every word and every letter, shetiknu, that they were misakin, that they instituted b'madbeya abrachos, in the nature of brachos v'atfilos, gnuzim b'hen soidos nizgovim ufloim. There are so many secrets and so many amazing ideas. V'divrei kotsham yusodim aladnei paz berozin eloin. Their words, their holy words, are founded on, again, on lofty ideas and lofty secrets and hidden secrets. That all the prayers are founded, are based on hidden, incredible ideas. Like we see from the Zohar Kodesh, V'kvisei Arizal, she'akol mesukan u'mesudar b'kavonos elyonis. Omar, and he said, we'll understand what it says. Omar lehen Rabban Gamliel azogim l'chachamim. Rabban Gamliel said to Chachamim that this is the Gemara that speaks about the adding of the 19th blessing to the Shemona Esrei. Is there anybody amongst you who can establish the blessing for the infidels? Omad Shmuel Akotan v'tikna. So Shmuel, the little one, he got up and he was misakin. There's a wonder. There were so many greats. Rabban Gamliel is one of the greats. There were so many geniuses and so many greats. What's the big deal? Just write down a few sentences in Lashon HaKodesh. Not so complicated, right? Since in every word there's great secrets and great ideas. You need a great sage. Okay, etc., etc. Okay, so again, I want to get into that's one part, right? So in other words, he says you can't just change nusach unless you have ruach hakodesh. But then he says ubeemes, and this is the part that I really want to read. Ubeemes shegam lefi pshutoy yizbayer hanusach shel tfilas nachem, and then really, even on a simple level, you can understand how the tefillah of Nachem applies today. Right? Al Har Tzion, we say, right? Al Har Tzion sheshameim shu'olim holchu bo. The pasuk says that the Mount of Zion is desolate and foxes are walking in it. Kimokaim hamikdash v'sivoisav nisunim biadzorim soin Yisrael. The place of the Beis Hamikdash and all its surrounding parts are in the hands of the foreigners, those that hate Israel. The Yerushalayim ha'atika oidenum leya gilulim. And the old city of Jerusalem is still full of idols of Avodah Zarah. Bekama knesios tmeyos, many knesios, churches that are tameh. V'asher lidei kumarehem u'minhagehem, and that through whose priests and leaders dam Yisrael nishpach kamayim b'chol adoyres. Throughout all the generations, the blood of Jews were spilled. Ubesvivois hamikdash kvurim Yishmael, and all around the Beis Hamikdash are the cemeteries of the Ishmaelim. Now, any Jew is forbidden to walk into the Harabayis. Why? Mishum tumas meis, because we are tamei meis, right? V'arabim machnisim pigrei misneim al hamokam hamikdash lona b'yois mekudash lona b'yoiser. And the Arabs not only they walk in, but they bring their dead to be buried there in the place that we're not allowed to walk in because maybe we touched a mace. Okay. Says there was a story that Rabbi Elazar ben Aruch, is way before anything happened, he was crying. When they asked him, why are you crying? I'm crying over the Evan Shesiyah, which is in the middle of the Beis Hamikdash. And then he continued, and he said, this Evan which is holy, which is above holy of holies. How will the future nations will denigrate you? And they will put dead bodies over you. To be metame the holy place. Because I see that in the future, some of the nations will place their dead bodies over it. How can you not cry over this? How it's terrible for such a generation that experiences these things. Because of Al-Zeb Sefer Eilam Asoy, and Eilam Asoy in the different Sefer writes over this, Veinenu in our own eyes. We see that this prophetic vision of Rabbi Elazar ben Aruch is mekuyim. We see it with our own eyes. That they actually bring all of their bodies into the Dome of the Rock before they take it to burial someplace else. Which is right over the Holy of Holies. So etc. Ve'ikar yeshuva shel Yerushalayim bezman habayis shehi b'tzad dorim shel beis hamikdash meuchlam adayin al yedei Arabim soinei Tzion is all populated by the Arabs, the haters of Israel. Yishloyo halim shlushodim hamoichos l'margizei el. And then there were tents there to those that anger God. And how many Jewish synagogues that were there in the olden days are still destroyed and desolate from the days that the old Yerushalayim fell. In Jordanian legions. Is an embarrassment and destruction greater than this? Over this, our hearts cry. Over this, our eyes are darkened. Any generation that doesn't have the Beis Hamikdash rebuilt in their eyes, it's as if they destroyed it. But we are singing and dancing. That we got to the Koisel Maravi. We're so happy we got our Koisel back. But Shehusrid Beis Mikdashenu, it's only a remnant of our Beis Hamikdash. Which is just the only thing it should remind you of is the destruction. The Zecher Lechurban, as he brings from his Sefer that Kafter Beferich, he says that even when you go to Aliyah L'Regel, when you go for a Yom Tov to Yerushalayim and you see the Koisel, you're there just to see to remind yourself of the Agmas Nefesh, of the pain that you're supposed to feel for the destruction. Etc. Okay. Next paragraph. And if besides all of that, the ruchnius of Yerushalayim is on the lowest level. There's so much life going on in Yerushalayim that's completely contrary to any Torah type of living. So many Jewish kids are being brought up against Torah and mitzvah, right? But, okay, I'm not going to stop here, but the point, it talks about Chilul Shabbos. Again, the point is that Yerushalayim, as we said over Shabbos, Yerushalayim is not about the King David Hotel. Okay, it's not about the new train or any of those things. Yerushalayim is a place that's supposed to represent Hashem's presence in the world, and Kol Zman that it does not represent Hashem's presence in the world, it's Shemema and Chareva. Okay, let's pray. I'm sorry for going over time.
It's a really